All right, let's get started. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from today. Welcome to part one of our CA Workload Automation CA 7 edition Performance Analysis and Tuning webcast series. This is part one of two. I think I know many of you already from the community, but for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Len Thompson. I'm the community manager in the CA Workload Automation community. Before I hand you off to Bill Sherwin, just wanted to let you know if you are listening to this via the WebEx audio rather than a phone line, please feel free to use the Q&A box in the lower right in the WebEx to ask your questions. If you don't see that Q&A box in the lower right of your screen right now, there's a question mark icon in the upper right, so just click on that and it'll open up for you. Please feel free to ask your questions throughout the session, but I'm going to guess that Bill's going to answer them all at the end. Is that right, Bill?
That's correct, yeah, because unfortunately I won't be able to see the questions whilst I'm doing the presentation because my screen's taken over with the presentation slides. So
right.
I'll get to the questions if there are any at the end.
Perfect. And with that, I'm going to hand you off to Bill Sherwin, so take it away, Bill.
Okay, thank you. Repeating what Len said, good day everyone, morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you happen to be. Welcome to this. My name is Bill Sherwin. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a CA 7 subject matter expert with CA. I've been with CA for about 33 years now, most of that time working on CA 7. What I'm going to do during this is really a repeat of a session I gave at CA World, talking about a sort of do-it-yourself performance analysis. So if I can, 1 second, move that out of the way. Why is that? There we go. I figured out why my slides weren't moving. Usual information, disclaimer, etc. So what are we going to cover today is really, I'm going to talk about what are the objectives in a moment and some disclaimers on the content of this material. And then we're going to look into database and queue performance. And then in part two, which will run on the 7th of February, in a couple of weeks' time, I'll be covering the second part of this, which will look at a CA 7 system and the various subtask performance analysis. So that's the agenda for today, is really to look at the database and the queue stuff. But first of all, what am I trying to achieve with this? Well, one of the things that we often ask to do is have a look or do service work on customer sites to look at how CA 7 is performing. And I thought, well, one of the things that could probably be done is for you as the customer to do it yourself in terms of initial review and analysis and looking at your CA 7 system, and then call us in if you feel that things aren't looking good or you need some a more in-depth analysis and so on and so forth. So what I'm trying to do with this session and the session on the 7th of February is to provide you with some information and mechanisms to do this D.I.Y type of review. Basically, it's just an initial review of various areas that can impact the performance of CA 7. And as I said, it's useful to highlight areas that you may then want to have a look at in more detail. And it all uses standard CA 7 reports and or command output available. There's nothing special about it. But what I am building and ready to provide is a performance analysis toolkit. And I'll explain a bit more of that towards the end. As to what that does, but basically it's designed to generate the graphs that you will see throughout this presentation automatically based on the report data that's required, so it will simplify the analysis process. Some disclaimers. Things to be aware of. Not all the information in this presentation or the one in February may be relevant to your site. There may be things, we talk about that you look at and say, well, actually, we don't do that, or, it's not relevant for us, and so on. That's fine. Just take what you need from this material. When any areas that are identified when you go through this process and do some analysis, you may find areas that are identified and you address them in whatever recommended way it is, but may only provide you with some minimal gains or none at all in terms of performance. So we're not saying, do this and everything will be wonderful and fantastic and run twice as quick as before. That may or may not happen, probably not. When I talk about this Performance Analysis Toolkit, it's report processing code, and when it's provided, it will be strictly on an as-is basis. It's not written by CA specifically. It's not supported by CA. It's something that I put together personally, and the PAT for CA7, Performance Analysis Toolkit for CA7, the routines may not work in everyone's environment. They're PC-based, and it's purely for reporting purposes. There are no automatic fixes, or it doesn't do anything for you. You just have to use the data and then do the actual activity and updates yourself. With that said, let's have a look now at the various areas that we're going to go through. Database performance, first of all. The whole idea of looking at the database and the performance of the database is to reduce unnecessary I/O against the database. The main reason being that there are two areas that can cause problems: unused dataset entries and old job definitions. I say problems, they can impact on the overhead of the system. So, for example, old jobs, whenever you run a scheduled scan, every hour, every 2 hours, whatever your SF scan options are set to, that scheduled scan will scan through every single job on the database, looking for jobs that have a schedule record. Therefore, if you have, hundreds or thousands and thousands of old jobs that aren't being used or aren't relevant, are no longer run in your database, they are adding a small but over time significant overhead to your CA7 processing schedule scan, because it has to look through all those jobs and then realize that they don't have a scheduled record, or they have a before or after date, but they're still there and have to be looked at initially. Whenever anyone does any sort of command, whether it be online or through a batch terminal or any other type of terminal that involves wildcards, both old job definitions and unused dataset entries, if you're doing a dataset list, will both impact the response time for accessing the data. Because again, when you're using wildcards, we're not going indexing directly into a particular job entry or dataset entry. We're having to scan through looking for jobs or datasets that match the wildcard you specify. In which case, again, old job entries, unused job entries, unused dataset entries add an overhead to the system for doing that. And the other thing is also to look at the daily and hourly activity around peak periods of accessing your database. That's another area that's useful to look at. So, looking at datasets first of all, one of the ways of doing it, or the way you do it, is use the LDSN command with an option saying list equals no user. What that does is list all the dataset entries that are not being used by any job in your system. Okay. The only problem is it produces it in a very large, long report, all text data. And so it can be difficult to actually analyze and figure out what have you actually got in there, what's used or what's not used, and how do I go about addressing it. So what we try to do, or what I try to do, is make it more understandable by grouping and counting at the by high-level qualifier and so on. And when the graph is generated, it says how many levels of qualifier do you want to group it by, and what's the minimum number of entries you want to display, and so on and so forth. So what it does is identify, hopefully, the high-level qualifiers or systems that have the most entries, and maybe those are the ones that you would address first. And also, maybe research to determine why have they got so many data set entries in your database. So review, add, and delete activity. So this is a sample of the report that you get, or the output you get from the list no user, LDSN list no user. And as you can see, whilst all the information's there, it's not exactly easy to read compared to something like this, where you're looking at data sets by 2 levels of high-level qualifier, and in this case, I'm showing entries that have more than 500. I'm only showing high-level qualifiers that have more than 500 LDSN entries in the CA7 database. So, and this makes it much simpler, that you can see that in this particular case, there are 94,000 entries that begin with K.ZS and 86,000 entries that begin with E.error. So, a big saving could be had by reviewing those and saying, why have we got all of these data sets in the database that are not being used by any of the jobs in those applications? What's loading them up? Why are they there? Can we get rid of them? Make sure they're not being used as triggers or for dependencies or anything like that. So what's the point in having them there? But it's much easier to understand when it's in a graph format like this. The other area, jobs not run. Jobs that have not run since some given time. And for example, in this case, listing all the jobs where the last run date was, for example, the 1st of January or the 31st of December 2009. So anything that hasn't run since the beginning of 2010 is probably no longer required, not going to run. You may not account for everything, and maybe on-demand or test-type work that you want to keep. But the majority of stuff in that sort of time range, that old, is no longer being run or used. And again, whilst you can do a list and get an L job and get a list of all the jobs, the data in list format is not so easy to understand or analyze. So again, we're processing the report output from the command, the LJob command with the L run date, into grouping by system name and grouping by how many you've got per year that they run. You can set, when you generate the report, you can set a number of entries to be included. And the extracted data is then used to generate a report. In this case here, you can see this is by system name, and there are 800 odd jobs in system called residence, 536 in elect role, 361 in mid, and so on and so forth. So by looking at it in this way, you can start addressing it system by system or application by application and saying, okay, why have we got 800 jobs in this residence application that aren't being run anymore? What are they? Can we get rid of them? Similarly, the same data, but this time processed on a year-by-year basis, and it shows for 2009, 2008, 2007, 2006, fairly large numbers of jobs that haven't run since those years. And then the older and older, as you get older and older, less and less old jobs appear. Presumably, some cleanup has been done. This is actually taking data from a customer. So it's real data that we're processing here. And then the next stage is to then look at database access using CA7 EasyTreeve or EARL report number 16, which gives you access counts for by the hour for updates, deletions, total access, etc., and really just gives you a view into peak processing periods or peak activity against your database, and may show up anomalies or heavy times when you don't want to be running a very large BTI job or anything of that nature. Again, taking that report and looking at it in various different ways. So here we have accessing the database, total accesses, so that's reads and writes and so on a day-by-day basis. And as you can see, it's up in the sort of 10 million mark on a daily basis, with some peaks up towards 18 million. You know, maybe that's a really busy day, and again, you can look at the date and say, okay, what was happening on that day? Maybe we ran some very large BTI job that processed data against the database, or we did some sort of function on that particular day. And again, look at the peaks and troughs and see, you know, does that match up with what you expect? Obviously, the low days generally tend to be weekends. And in this case, there's the Sundays. And then we can look at it and take the same data, but instead of doing it total number of accesses per day, we now look at it as an average number of accesses for each of the hours of a day taken over the whole month. And as you can see from this, you know, certainly 4 o'clock, there's a huge peak in database access on average across the month, with, you know, over 3.5 million accesses on during that hour, compared to, you know, under 500,000 for most other days of the month, with the exception of hours of the day, with the exception of 1, 2, and 3 o'clock. So between 1 and 4 is a peak database access period. This may tie in with particular work that you're doing. It may be your busiest time for running work and applications in the system. So maybe, you know, there is a good reason behind it. Or it may be that, you know, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, somebody runs a massive forecasting type report against the database in a BTI job, and impacts your CA7 system when you don't really want it to. So again, it's looking for things like this, that are anomalies that might provide you with clues as to what is impacting on your system. Here, based on the large numbers of data sets that we have, I did an extract against dataset ads. You can break down that same report and look at it on a day basis for particular types of records, in this case dataset records. And as you can see, on day 17,235, there were a large number of dataset ads going on against the database, and a pretty heavy-duty one on the 3rd day of the month. So again, you know, this is something to look at. Why is that happening on that particular day? Is this something that happens every month? You run these reports, they're a month at a time. If you run them, produce them every month, you can then see whether or not this is a common symptom on a month-by-month basis, or just a one-off for this particular month. Moving on, queue performance. Which is the second part of the session, a bit more detail here. And again, you know, queue performance and also sizing is important. First of all, the things to look at are your pre-post and request queues initially. You can use the display queue equals all command to get a display like this. One of the things to review, certainly initially, is your queue files for the pre-queue and post-queue, which 99% of people or customers that I deal with aren't using. As you can see from this example here, They're both allocated with 45 tracks and have 43 and 44 tracks available. The customer, this particular customer, is not using them at all. Okay. However, just because you or any customer is not using the pre or post queues, the CA7 system will still look at those queues to see if there is anything in there. If you're not using pre-jobs, pre-execution jobs and post-execution jobs, network-type jobs, as they're sometimes called, or input and output jobs, then there will never be any tasks in those queues, but that doesn't stop CA7 from looking at it. It has to check every time it looks at the queues to see what needs to be done. It looks at those two queues as well. So the best thing for those is to set them to optimal values for when they aren't being used. And the size of each needs to be at a minimum 3 tracks, not 45 as shown in the example before. So initially use 3 tracks. That's your minimum requirement. Set your pre and post queues up to be 3 tracks long. And in the previous example, the index setting was Y, which says we only index the entries, not everything. We don't keep everything in memory. We only keep the index in memory. Set it to index equals A, which means everything in those queues will be kept in memory. Now, that will give you the fastest access time by having it in memory. There will be no updates going on to that queue because it's not being used. So there'll be no actual I/O activity back to disk. And by setting it to the minimum of 3 tracks, you're minimizing the amount of memory that's used by putting these 2 queues into memory. So certainly look at your pre and post queues and make sure they are minimum size and set to index A to keep them in memory. The third one to look at in terms of sizing is the request queue, primarily because you want to make sure that if you go into any sort of backlog situation, you're not going to start blowing your queue or blowing the space available in your queue. Because usually if you've got some sort of delay going on or a problem, you get a backlog building up in your request queue. And so, when you have a problem, when you have that delay, the last thing you want to do is suddenly find that you've run out of space in your request queue. So the recommendation generally is to allow for a backlog of at least 2 times what your peak load would be. So you look at the entry to the request queue from your display queue equals all command, and you can see how many tracks you've got allocated, how many are available, and how many entries you have in the used tracks, and therefore also how many available entries are left. In the example here, the maximum amount, we have 2,170 entries and space for 1,899, a total of 4,069 maximum entries available in those 15 tracks of space that are allocated to the request queue. So what we can do then is look at report 35 from CA or EasyTree to determine what your peak loading is. And the basic calculation that I've used is to say, well, okay, your peak load is going to be the highest amount of jobs you have at some hour of the day. But then when you get into delays, you're not going to be bringing every job in. There are going to be job completions are going to be reduced because of your work being delayed, and therefore less jobs will be triggered in. So I'm using an estimated reduction of approximately 75%. So what we're saying is how many jobs have we got being brought into request queue by scheduled job, and then take 25% of triggered jobs, take 25% of completed jobs, and reduce those figures based on those calculations. Again, here's the report in report format. Not easy to understand, difficult to look at, not easy to give you a good clue. Whereas if we take that data and process it, we'll get estimated average peak loading per hour. And as you can see from the example here, midnight is the peak load period, midnight till 1 o'clock, with 1,800 jobs entry, with a lower peak at 22 or 10 o'clock in the evening, 10 to 11, just over 1,000. So we can look at that and say, okay, you know, our peak load at that point is 1,843. So based on the calculations, the 4,096 entries that we're allowed or that we have available in the request queue should be sufficient for peak period plus an allowance of 2 times for accounting for delays and so on. The other area to look at is access counts by day against the queues. Again, what we're looking for is anomalies or peaks of usage. When is your busy time of the day? You can generally identify what are weekends because the counts tend to be lower at the weekend. Not true for every site, very obviously. Some sites are busy, as busy at weekends as during the week, but other sites you can see the difference. And there may be ways of looking at if you're really hammering your queues at a certain time of the day or certain days of the week. Are there ways of adjusting your workload to try and reduce that? So you're scanning really for higher counts on certain days, and in the examples, look at day 220 and a few others show really high REQ counts. And what that could indicate is that there is a high number of retries for submission from the REQ because of things like workload balancing or virtual resources. So they're indicators to possibly other problems that you might have in your system, which we can look at in a short while. So again, sample report breaks it to queues down, number of adds by hour to each of the queues, adds, deletes, total accesses, and so on. Not very easy to process and look at and understand. So we take it, load it into, extract the data and load it into a graph like this. So here we now have a profile of the request queue, total accesses by date, and it's a fairly even average, a bit lower towards the end of the month, but fairly even, no real big peaks and troughs. When we look at the REQ though, we can see there are several days when we have much higher counts, over 7 million on day 220, and 6 million on days 205, 207, 224, and 231. So again, that may be perfectly justified, or it may be that on those particular days there is some other activity going on that is delaying the work and causing retries for submission, possibly on those particular days. And we'll look at prompt and retries later on to see if that may be causing the problem. Similarly, active queue tends to be much less processed against. However, you can see where there are low peaks, low troughs tend to equate to weekends. Again, you're looking for any particularly high or particularly low activity that stands out. Likewise, the prior run queue, because obviously, when jobs complete, everything gets moved into prior run queue. So the profile for that, again, should be similar. And as you can see, the access counts on that are can be up in the 100 millions. And if you look at things like the trailer queue and the request queue, they often show similar profiles, primarily because, when you're processing jobs, loading jobs into the request queue, you're equally accessing and updating the trailer queue with job information, JCL, and various dependencies and datasets and all that sort of information. So you would expect the profile, the counts are significantly higher, more data going into the trailer queue, but you should see a similar pattern in terms of peaks and troughs between things like the trailer queue and the request queue. The other way to then break it down, we've looked at those peaks and troughs on a day-by-day basis, but what we really would look at is, what will be benefit is, what's our peaks and troughs like at times of the day on an hour-by-hour basis. So taking, again, what we're doing is taking an average for each hour over the month period being processed. And in the examples, we can see that midnight to 1 a.m. is the highest for the request ready and active queues, and that ties up with our graph, peak loading graph, when we showed that peak loading was between midnight and 1 a.m. And so you would expect there to be higher counts on those days. And in the example, prior run queue is peaks between 5 and 6 and 6 and 7. And that could be when a lot of the work is actually being finished. So the thing to do is look at these and say, is this common across all the days? Is this standard? Can you validate that the peaks and troughs you're seeing conform to your actual CA7 workload activity? So we're taking it here, and this is our request queue, a peak at midnight or 1 o'clock, again, slightly lower peaks at 10 to 11, 11 to midnight, and that pretty much marries up with our peak loading that we looked at earlier. Similarly, ready queue, again, higher peaks at midnight, but also fairly high peaks at 10 and 11 in the morning, 6 in the morning, and 10 at night. Ready queue accesses can be impacted by things like workload balancing and virtual resources not being available, causing retries of jobs for submission. So each time you retry to submit the job, because it wasn't submitted before, you've got access against the ready queue. So if you see peaks and troughs in this, you start wanting to look at things like virtual resource usage and workload balancing usage. Again, active queue, again, similar profile to the request queue, without the peaks that the ready queue has. So in the middle of the month, in the middle of the day. So it's a case of, you have a much more balanced graphs for the active queue and the request queue, but you've got different unusual peaks in your ready queue at certain hours of the day. You may want to investigate a little bit further. So what we then do is switch this around a little bit and say, okay, so we had high counts in the various queues and the request queue at midnight. Is this the same every day of the month? So now what we're doing is looking at the 1 hour, just that 1 hour of midnight, and looking and showing the counts that we averaged before, but now we're showing individual counts for that 1 hour across the month in question. And as we can see, apart from Sundays, the weekends, where you've got very low activity, it's fairly similar across most days of the month for that 1 hour midnight to 1 a.m. We had the prior run queue. We looked at the hourly average, and we can see in the prior run queue that we have big peaks at 5 o'clock and slightly lower at 6 and 7. So again, doing the same thing, we take the prior run queue counts for that 1 hour at 5 a.m. and say, is this the same across the whole month? And again, apart from the Sundays, where the peaks are lower. It's pretty much even. The amount of hits against the prior run queue is the same at 5 a.m. across every day of the month, mostly. What about at 4 a.m.? And as you can see, it varies on different days of the month. There are much towards the end of the month, prior run queues gets much more of a hit against it at 4 a.m. than it does earlier on in the month. Looking at 6 a.m., the 1 hour from 6 a.m. to 7 a.m., again, that's pretty much even on every day of the month, even at the weekends. So again, what we're looking at is saying, well, okay, because these accounts are pretty much the same on a day-to-day basis, we would expect that to be standard. But maybe we can look at why is it all happening, certainly in the request to REQ queue, such a high peak at midnight to 1 a.m. Maybe we need to look at how we're scheduling our workload. So that's really pretty much finished the quick look. It is a very high-level look. We've only got a small amount of time, and of the database and the queues and the performance of the queues. As I say, in the next session on 7th of February, I'll do a similar thing, looking at the system tasks, CA7ONL tasks, subtasks within that. Things like schedule scan processing, job completion processing, job submission processing, where we'll look at jobs that are late, look at virtual resource usage, workload balancing usage, and how that can impact job submission and job completions and so on. Now, all of the stuff that I've shown you in those graphs are being generated automatically through some stuff that I've written called the Performance Analysis Toolkit for CA7, or PAT for CA7 for short, which basically provides the necessary code to take a particular report used by a particular graph, extract the necessary or relevant data out of that, throwing away all the other stuff that we don't want, heading lines and data columns we don't need, and so on and so forth, and takes that data and feeds it into Excel as comma-separated values data to generate, with an Excel, use that data to then generate the graph. So every graph that we have has got effectively an associated code set consisting of a REQ routine to do the extract of data and create the CSV, comma-separated values file that is then imported into Excel. And there is an Excel master spreadsheet that contains the macro that processes or loads the data when executed and uses that data, loaded data, to generate the graphs that you've been seeing. And all of that process is run by a DB script that drives execution of REQs and drives the execution of Excel to generate the graph. And what I've put together is a simple little menu system. I'll show you in a second, so you can select which graphs to generate. And what you need to do with the graph system, there's some instructions that tell you for each graph exactly what report or command you have to generate or use to generate the necessary report. You run that on the mainframe. Put the output for that report to a file and download that file to a PC. So what you've got in that file is the standard CA7 report. It has to be saved in with a specific name for that report in the reports directory, and then you select the graph option from the menu like this. Pull down menu for the different areas. We've looked at database analysis and queue analysis so far. The other areas we'll look at next month. Select the particular graph you want and assuming the report is there, it will process it using Windows REQ and generate the CSV file, automatically invoke Excel, and what will happen when you select that there is in front of you, it will pop up the Excel spreadsheet graph with processing the actual data. Now, in order to run this, you need to be able to install Regina REQs on your PC. A number of people have said to me that they haven't got the ability to install REQs or anything like that on their works PC. And so on that basis, what I will be doing when I've completed the REQ routines for all of these for all of these on Windows REQs, taking that REQ routine and converting it to run as on ZOS using IBM REQs. There are differences in I/O and things like that, but the main processing will be the same. So the choice then, instead of downloading the report to be processed locally on the Windows system, what you'll do is create the report and process the extract on the mainframe using the ZOS REQs, and then download to a different version of this system that will process, just do the Excel bit, process the extracted CSV data and build your graph. And that way you don't have to install anything on a work PC. There are still some entries that aren't completed. If I just go back briefly, as you can see in this pull-down menu, one of those is red. There are, if I pull down a number of other menu items, there are other red entries where all of the scripts and the Excel macros have been generated, have been created, but the REQ extract routines are still being written, so not all of them are there yet. Red entries will not execute, green ones are usable. And so if you're interested, let me know. Email me at bill.sherwin@ca.com or follow me on Twitter my name is at CA7WA_expert, because I'll be notifying on Twitter when the report sets the REQ sets are complete. If anyone wants to try out the subset that's available at the moment, again, let me know. I'm happy to send you a reduced version that will do some of the reports for you. Not all of them are there yet, but it will help me with the testing on PCs other than CA ones that I've been doing at the moment. So I'd be happy to send out and let you beta test it for me. And I am also talking with CA Services to see whether we can do something about offering a more in-depth service around this. So if you do come across some anomalies and things that you want to investigate more, then based on using this D.I.Y toolkit, then maybe you'd like to get CA to come in and do a service against that, where we take this information and then process it more and provide a more in-depth analysis. So stay tuned. Part 2 will be coming up on the 7th of February at the same time, and I look forward to having you all join me then. Thanks very much, and what I'll do now is escape from the presentation and see if there are any questions that have come up in the WebEx.
Great, Bill. Thanks so much. There were a few questions. I think I answered most of them, but the very first one is one that you have to answer. It says, we have noticed that it takes CA7 several seconds to notice that a JES2 job is completed before it triggers the next job. We are using icon with option XCF notify. What can we do to improve the reaction time of CA7 on ICOM notifications?
Okay, so say that again, and let me have a look at the Q&A myself. It's probably going to be easier.
Yeah, it'll be easier for you to read it.
Yeah. Okay, so we have noticed that it takes several seconds for just to, okay. what can we do to improve the action time of CA7 on notification? Okay, so really the thing here is to try and determine where is the slowdown happening, and there are various reports, and some of those we'll be processing in the next session to look at what we call dwell time, and that's the period of time that it takes to do certain things in the stage, in this case, of job completion. There's dwell time in submission, processing, and stuff like that. So it could be that the delays in the feedback of getting it through XCF to ICOM and onto the COM-DS. The delay could be in CA7 not getting to that SMS data on the COM-DS quick enough, or it could be in actually doing the completion processing. So we've got the SMF record in CA7, but then it takes time to actually go around and mark the job as complete and trigger the next job in. The next job being triggered in maybe have large amounts of JCL, or there may be a problem with your JCL library in terms of performance of accessing it. So before I can answer that question, what we need to do is look at each of the stages in the process of a job completing in JES, generating an SMF job end record, and that job end record being picked up by ICOM, XCF, to COM-DS, to CA7, to job completion processing, through job trigger processing, through loading your job into the REQ, and as a request queue, and then getting that ready for submission. So, whereabouts is the delay would need to be analysed and looked at across that whole chain. So I'm afraid I can't answer that really in terms of what can you do to improve it. At the moment, I don't know without knowing what the cause of the problem is. But we can certainly, discuss that and look at that and try and identify where the problem is, and then maybe we can come back with some methodology to address that. Can we get a copy of the presentation? Yes. I think, and it will be recorded as well, I believe, Len. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay, and your answer is I'll be publishing it. Okay, good. Will the pack be made for download? Yes, from me. I'm hoping that at some point, pack for CA7, when it's complete, will be available via a CA website. But initially, you have to contact me through email, and I will be able to send it out to you in a packaged format with instructions on how to actually unpackage that and download it. Yeah, right now to get that. Okay, yeah, mail me. Okay. Are the performance considerations the same for R12 as well as 11.3? Pretty much, although with the use of Datacom, sizing tends not to be as much of an issue. But pretty much all of the queue reports, access reports, average time for access and total access count won't change. That won't change because they are I/O. They're reporting within CA7 as to how many times it attempts the I/O, and whether that I/O is direct reads against the DSAM or calls to Datacom for R12 won't really change that. We'll still be trying to read the data or write the data and so on. So yes, for pretty much all of the stuff I've talked about this week and in a couple of weeks' time is applicable to R12 as well as our 11.3. Okay, that seems to be all of them. Thank you very much, everyone. As I say, please email me if you are interested in doing some beta testing of PAC for CA7. and I'll package something up and send it out to you. Please be aware not all the items work at the moment, but that will be corrected. If there are no more questions, thank you very much, and look forward to seeing you or speaking with you again on the 7th of February.
All right. Thanks, Bill. Have a great day. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.